I think Ziggy Stardust has been a giant influence, like even to me since art school, and then we all love David Bowie, and there's some Bowie, a lot of Bowie on Black Parade as well. Like I guess Black Parade is kind of when the glam kind of started, and it's very much alive and well in this one. But oddly enough, this record started to feel a bit like Diamond Dogs in a weird way, because that was kind of his last hurrah with glam, and towards the completion of the album, I started to see a lot of parallels.
The concept was fully realized probably towards the end of the record. Like the story and the world came to fruition as the record was coming to fruition, which made it feel very organic. And we weren't trying to like shove things into little spots like, oh, this song's great, but it doesn't fit because the story is this. It was like, all right, well, the story is now this because of the song.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I think the big thing for this record was it was more thematic than story-based, and I think it worked out better to our advantage. Yeah, like you said, you kind of, when you're trying to tell a story, you definitely sometimes get yourself stuck a little bit because you're like, oh, we need this style of song or this this part to complete the story, and this really just having more more based on themes and like he was saying, like the language being used, like that's where the concept comes from.
Well, everyone, here we are. We made it. The end. The final full-length and the swan song of the original run of My Chemical Romance. The beloved yet despised fourth record. A dark and mysterious album, marking the band's career as its most deep and intense material yet. Finally embracing themselves as not only the gods of emo, but the kings of the Molgoths. Actually, hold up, wait a second. Never mind, it's actually Danger Days, the true lives of the fabulous Killjoys. When it comes to explosive finales, you probably think of bands that break up due to internal conflicts, or a record that bombed so hard it caused everyone to bow out and give up on the project. But like everything else regarding My Chemical Romance, even their initial breakup and final output eludes the standard trappings of the traditional band storyline, as the Danger Days era is a bit of an odd but not completely tumultuous story. It's one of a band who was able to maintain the spotlight that they'd gained and somehow grow their influence even stronger as they reached the end of their story. And even at that, the end of the story as it were, because in less than 10 years, the boys would get back together and start everything up again, with a new album in the tank, though God knows if that will ever see the light of day. But hey, they got a new overpriced tour for you to attend, so make sure to head over to Live Nation and hand over your life savings and your firstborn child. But alas, after 3 long videos and a year of work, we've made it to the final chapter of the initial run of one of music's most loved, hated, and impressive bands. And in retrospect, I don't think anything else would be more fitting for a band known for being the forerunners and tastemakers of the 2000s Molgoth wave than finishing off by abandoning everything full sail, shedding their skin, and recreating themselves into the colorful, pop-oriented band that put out a record full of optimism, hope, and Power Ranger-esque characters fighting 70s sci-fi villains in a post-apocalyptic Los Angeles, especially after the darkness and serious nature of their previous work. So, let's just cut everything here. Let's not beat around the bush any further. Without further ado, let's talk about Danger Days and the true end of the original run of My Chemical Romance.
Is this our destiny? Is
like this kind of like vulnerability matched up with fearlessness is actually a really amazing thing, and only real artists possess that, like to be able to be vulnerable and fearless at the same time. It's a crazy thing because, you know, that's like, in a weird way, it's like being ready to die or something. And to be able to show that is what a great artist does.
After the raging success that was The Black Parade, My Chemical Romance began to really press their weight around, snagging on opening slots for fucking Bon Jovi of all artists, being one of the bigger names on Linkin Park's Project Revolution tour, and embarking on many headlining tours, performing sold-out arenas and sometimes just theaters, but regardless, massive shows. And they would even do a tie-in song for Zack Snyder's film, The Watchmen. And probably the most respectable move they pulled during this era was rejecting a song from the Twilight soundtrack. And this is without even mentioning the video game soundtracks that they had been appearing in since 2004. But especially after 2006, with the massive wave of success, they would begin to appear in games like the Guitar Hero and Rock Band series, as well as countless racing and sports games. Though, needless to say, this would all end up in the band going into a path that's both coveted and feared by most artists. And that's when you've reached the peak of the mountain. The amount of fame, money, influence, and industry power that MCR had achieved reached a point that most people would never even be able to dream of. And it was also during this same time that many of the members would finally reach a point in their lives where they could not just chase their other dreams, but fully step into the world of adulthood. As this was the era where many of them would begin to buy up their houses, get a mortgage, and get hitched. In 2007, Gerard, Frank, and Mikey would each get married, and Ray would prevent it all from seeming like some sort of publicity stunt by patiently waiting until 2008 to marry his wife. Now, while this is a bit of lore that most people know and might seem a bit unrelated from the band, it couldn't be further from the truth in that regard, because it's actually very responsible for a lot of what happened during this time period and how things would move forward. Each of the members was essentially entering into the same chapter of life around the same time, and this would be a big reason as to why things would go the way that they did. Each of them feeling much of the same kind of pressure of not only needing to care for themselves and the band, but having a wife and possible kids on the way that they need to take care of, and the changes that comes with that to your mental state, your emotional well-being, and your overall outlook on life. Now, the other big factor at play during this era was the long on and off touring cycle, as it would take a heavy toll on the band because, touring for that amount of years is just, well, it's gonna do something to you. So, after Black Parade had kind of fully went through its cycle, My Chemical Romance would take a step back and take a break, and many of the members would start to go outside of the band to fulfill their dreams and start pursuing things outside the project. The two most notable would be Gerard Way's foray into comics and Frank Iero starting a new band. During this time period, Frank would begin the infamous side project Leathermouth. Now, I could easily do a full video on Leathermouth since there's quite a bit to actually talk about regarding that project, but I will give a bit of a Cliff Notes version here. Leathermouth was a small band that Frank had taken some interest in and wanted to sign to his label Skeleton Crew. But due to the vocalist failing to really get his shit together, Frank would end up joining as the lead vocalist and turning the band into his heavy hardcore punk project, where he would yell about George Bush and his growing anxieties in life and a world that he saw burning around him. Leathermouth would end up being a pretty big success, all things considered. While they were nowhere near the realms of where MCR was during this time period, they did have a very big cult following, and their one and only album XO would prove to be a fan favorite. This was a record that went so hard that the United States Secret Service, or the SS for short, had to pay our boy Frank a visit just to let him know that if he performed his creatively titled song, "I'm going to hug the President of the United States of Uganda," that he would have to spend around 5 years in the federal fudge packing factory. But it was his taste of creative freedom and success that would allow for Frank to have a much more focused outlet for his aggression and his creativity, far more than what he was able to do with MCR at least. Now, on the other side of the Farrar coin, we have our main man G, and Gerard during this point was making some big money moves with his connections. He finally was able to start that comic book career that he had dreamed of before MCR was ever even a thing, and would begin to work with Dark Horse Comics to publish his first real series, Umbrella Academy. The Umbrella Academy comic would prove to be a pretty successful endeavor in a similar vein to Leathermouth, not exactly becoming a massive household name, but proving to be a cult success that both brought many new fans into Gerard's growing following and served as another piece of his artistry for the thousands upon thousands of MCR fans who were eager to see what Gerard's comic explorations would result into. The rest of the band ultimately, though, would have more quiet, reserved lives outside of MyChem during this period. But the important bit that's going to come into play later would be the beginning of some deep and tumultuous tensions between drummer Bob Breyer and the family breakfast enthusiast Mikey Way. While none of this would directly have to do with MyChem outside of these projects and the life events happening to involve the members, it's important to bring these things up because it was these experiences, paired with the band's previous output in non-stop touring, that would really affect the tone and direction that they would choose to go moving forward, especially when writing what would eventually culminate in Danger Days.
So the obvious thing to start with is, it's been 4 years since you put an album out, and your fans have been rabidly waiting for a new one. What took you guys so long to put this album out?
Let's see. Well, we toured a long time on Parade. That was like a good,
that was like 2.5 years.
2.5 years. It was a brutal tour. Amazing tour. Record did great. Kept us out there. We just kind of didn't know when to say no. Because we just loved playing for people. Then we're getting these offers to play in Southeast Asia, South America, and we just kept going and going and going until there was just nothing left, and ended with MSG. But then I think, we were just burnt by then.
Come 2009, MCR would release their Bob Dylan cover, Desolation Row, as part of the soundtrack for The Watchmen. And after this track would see release, Gerard would begin to finally talk about what was coming up next for My Chemical Romance. Now, given that it had been the longest time period between records for the band ever, fans were eager for new music, and MCR was still reigning as one of the biggest names in contemporary rock. But when Gerard would finally give his initial words on the new record, well, some cracks would really begin to show.
Black Parade. I think, doing that record kind of made us feel like we can do everything. And so I think the way to top a record that already kind of does everything is to not do everything. I don't think that this is going to be like let's call it a kitchen sink record. I think it's going to get by on its musicianship and its own merits in the songs. And that's what, if every record, I like to think there's snapshots of what your band is at that moment. And this is really going to be that. I think there's going to be lack of concept. I think it's simply a snapshot. I think it's going to be direct and very honest and just, it's not going to be hiding behind a veil of fiction or uniforms and makeup anymore. So that kind of stuff's very exciting to me.
He would comment that after the Black Parade, he and the band wanted to take things back to basics and do a much more stripped-down garage-style record. But most importantly, Gerard would remark that he planned on not doing another concept record and really stripping everything back, including the visual identity of the band. It's not going to be hiding behind a veil of fiction or uniforms and makeup anymore. It's kind of ironic to think about now, considering the album that we got, but in reality, there was a record that was made with the more stripped-down rock mentality in mind, and without any real theatrics or concept to it. It just so happened to be shelved before release. When the band decided that they weren't satisfied with the finished product, and well, it was lost to the ether until 2012 when Conventional Weapons would finally be released. That comment about not making a kitchen sink record, I think really shows the fatigue that the band, and especially Gerard, had felt after years of chasing after deeper concepts and more theatrical stage shows. I bring that up because it wasn't only the darkness that the band had dabbled in so long that burnt them out. Making records built on expanding and experimenting with new sounds and themes, while also creating the heavily stylized and aesthetic looks and motifs for both their stage fashion and the album art, well, it's gonna take a toll on you, especially after 7 straight years of having to up the ante every single tour and every single record. But there was also another key aspect to think about, and that's the way that Gerard mentions hiding behind a veil of makeup and uniforms. While I don't think it's ever been fully addressed, I do think that the mixture of becoming a father along with the rest of the band getting married and the years and years of criticism of the band's flamboyant dress and theater-like production value had also put a lot of pressure on them. It almost feels like Gerard felt like he had to prove something, that the band was good without all the gimmicks and all the bells and whistles that really made them stand out from the crowd. And if we jump forward a little bit to a 2010 interview with Alternative Press magazine, after Conventional Weapons had been shelved and Danger Days had been released, that frustration with the criticism and even the trappings of the fan base he cultivated still shows up. These guys who want to have the mohawk, which to me is the new business casual, and buy the shirts at the mall that say they're angry at something, they have to prove by how they look and that they're mad, cool, and have cred. Go ahead, hold that torch. I'm not singing for you. It's just such a specific and targeted comment. But given that throughout the band's tenure, and especially into the late 2000s, My Chem had been a massive target of both punks and metal purists alike, calling them posers and dragging their name through the proverbial mud for so long, I can't help but think that it just played a huge role in this idea of just stripping everything away, including the theatrics, from a band that has more or less been defined by those aspects up to this point. And given that with those elements brought back with the album that we did eventually get, but it being in the complete opposite direction, it all just reeks of frustration and wanting to prove a point. But hey, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. We'll get there when we get there. The original 4th record was born out of a desire to emulate the recording process of Desolation Row, focusing more on live recording sessions and stripped down production. But even with all these limitations that the band was attempting to use as a tool for musical deviation, the actual sound of Conventional Weapons really just sounds like a more straightforward My Chemical Romance. As you can hear, the core elements of hard rock and punk are still in full effect, just a little less flamboyant and a lot less over the top. There's more of a radio rock sound to the instruments, and the band's fuller, more post-hardcore sound of previous material. And this is the case for most of the songs off this record. While I do see why the band might wanted to shelve this album initially, as it's a lot more subdued of a record and has a lack of flash and flair compared to everything that's come before, and would probably feel like a bit of a step down after such a theatrical and bombastic masterpiece like The Black Parade, I do think that they made a mistake in shelving it. Because the more topical and interesting aspect of Conventional Weapons is that the songs showcase a lot of the DNA of what would end up becoming the sound of Danger Days. I mean, just listen to this song, Ambulance. It's a much more power pop inspired song that shows the seeds from which Danger Days would grow. And tracks like this are sprinkled all across the material here. In all honesty, if the band had just taken 5 or 6 of the best tracks off this thing and put it out as some sort of EP, I think it would have served as a good bridge for Danger Days, easing the fans into the more pop-oriented sound that they were beginning to flirt with, and stripping down the heaviness and darkness that MCR's name was known for. But alas, as the story goes, this album would still end up shelved regardless of what armchair bullshit I'm gonna pull here. And while we did eventually get these songs in 2012, it's still a shame that it took so long to see release, as this would be the swan song for drummer Bob Breyer, whose performance on this thing is actually pretty fucking great, and despite the aimless nature that the album kind of carries, it's still a very competent record for what it is. And even then, I say it's aimless, but this is just a compilation and collection of tracks. It probably would have been way more cohesive if it had been finished and, given a proper track listing in order and re-recorded and released with a much more complete vision. Since most of the time when writing albums, you don't really write it in a specific order. You create a collection of songs, you find out what works, and then from there is typically when you would start to re-record certain aspects to make them fit together in the proper order and give the album proper cohesions and competency. But again, regardless of any of that, for my chem it just wasn't something that they were initially happy with. In an AP interview, Ray Toro even went into detail about it. I remember being in the studio with such a sour face for some of those sessions. There were songs that needed more than what we were allowing them to have. Your heart is telling you to have fun, be creative and experiment, but your brain is saying, we can't do that because we told ourselves that we can't do that. The mindset that we were in was, we can't not make this work. And following up on that statement, Frank would remark something similar in an interview about how they felt that the band was scared of what they had left with those sessions. But it was during the fallout of Conventional Weapons that the band would continue to write new songs, and the ethos of what would become Danger Days would finally begin to take form and birth from those ashes.
We're tired. We're so excited. We started driving like 8 o'clock the other night and haven't stopped school.
Yeah, I got an acoustic guitar for my 10th birthday, and I remember not really liking it very much at first, and then about, a few years later, I picked it up again, and then I really wanted an electric. So then I got an electric when I was about 15, and then I started writing songs immediately.
Before the band had fully committed to shelving Conventional Weapons, they had already begun producing new material, this time without the limitations and trappings that they had put on themselves. And from these initial tracks, they would begin to embrace an entirely new direction. Another aspect of this would begin to fully form here was the idea that being raw and stripped down wasn't actually the issue that they were having, but instead it was just fatigue and burnout from all the darkness that they had encased themselves in since day one. I mean, this was a project that birthed from the trauma of witnessing people die and bearing witness to one of the biggest tragedies to face on American soil. Another huge aspect that also played a big role in all of this was the band's guilt for the issues faced by fans due to misinterpretation of their message and the heat given to them by the media in their slanderous articles, as well as the uproar of those who hated the fans and wanted to both verbally and sometimes even physically harass them.
Well, there's a lot of rules set forth right away. I think it was a reaction to, in a weird way, not wanting to go through some of the things maybe we'd gone through on Black Parade. Maybe some of the hard stuff, the misinterpretation, the kids getting hurt, kind of like these hate crimes things happening and stuff like that. It was like it's like, all right, let's not make something that makes noise again, because when we do that, bad stuff happens.
But it's not your fault. I mean,
Of course. Yeah, but it takes a while to realize that, and it still bothers you. Not, people could say whatever they want about us, but it bothers you when they say something about kids and they paint a target on them, So it was weird. It was like, yeah, we don't want to rock the boat. So we made a very safe kind of rock record. almost using it as armor. Like, oh, look how, tough and rock we can be, and straight and 30-something we could be, and then we rebelled against that.
It's easy to see from this interview that it was obviously a big deal to the band and something that really bothered Gerard in specific. But this also leads to yet another contributing factor, because when you start to really look into why the massive shift from Black Parade to Danger Days happened, it's like an onion just full of layers and layers of different aspects and issues and things that really led to, well, Danger Days. And that other big aspect would be the growing aversion to dark and heavy subject matter. The band had been stewing in it for a long time, and in that same interview from before, they say just about as much, even commenting about how much they have to sit in the darkness themselves in order to produce that kind of material.
I mean, we did make the Black Parade 2 be challenging. Like, the theory at the time was there is hope on this record. It is a positive record, but to get to it, you got to go through, just like in life, you got to go through a lot of really dark stuff to get to that hope. So there's these slivers of it on the record, but again, they're hard to get to.
And once again, this interview really is prophetic in telling us everything we need to know, because Gerard even confirms at one point that getting married and finding happiness and peace in his more adult and settled life played a big role in the band shifting its image and its desire to embrace a much more colorful and outwardly positive sound and aesthetic. Though, funny enough, another large aspect at play, because yes, there's another one, was also the frustration that the band had felt towards the growing consumerism and commercialism of the once underground and DIY nature of the scene that they helped foster. While this isn't anything new, because if we go back to even during the Revenge era, you had comments like this.
Will I be a demographic? Something someone can use for evil? Do you like that? Fuck no, you don't. Occasionally, some motherfucker's gonna try to use you for their doomsday device. You know what you say to them? You say, you cannot destroy me!
It's something that only got worse as time went on. For the geriatrics in the audience who remember the late 2000s, the whole emo thing was shit on and scoffed at for most of its initial run. But as it began to really reform itself in the latter part of the decade as scene, it still faced ridicule. But the bands involved still began to grow, and they would see real recognition, finding themselves playing bigger and more mainstream festivals all across the world, as well as major label support, and even industry plants being put into the ecosystem. And with that also came an even more gross and all too familiar attempt to corporatize the whole thing. One of the biggest successes that would really embody this was the Twilight film series. Infamous now for being dog shit, and even the books themselves being remembered as the toilet paper they were, at the time, they were a huge phenomenon, on a similar level of popularity and acclaim as Harry Potter. Which is pretty fucking hilarious when you consider that Twilight was actually originally birthed by the fact that the writer was doing a little fan fiction about Gerard himself. But again, the movie studios knew that they had a big hit on their hands during the production of the first film, and the only way to take it even further was to obtain songs from popular artists in the alternative and emo spaces, whose fan bases would absolutely flock to the film, not only out of some genuine interest, but also many fans who would attempt to do so to support their favorite bands and the potential Hollywood success that they could find through Twilight being a huge spotlight for them. And in many ways, this would come true. One of Paramore's most famous and popular tracks to this very day is Decode, which was featured on the movie's soundtrack and played a big role in bringing them even higher amounts of success at the time. Other bands who would join in on featuring on this fucking film would be Linkin Park and Muse, and I really don't think I need to express just how big those two names were in 2008. So when My Chemical Romance had really been approached, and was the band that without a doubt would have been the best match for a film like this, let's just say that they weren't too interested in what Paramount was selling. And this would even end with them writing a song called Vampire Money in response. That's why the song Vampire Money is on our new album, because there's a lot of people chasing that money. Twilight, a lot of people around us were like, please, for the love of God, you have to do this movie. But we'd moved on. This interview would go on, and Gerard would talk about how the band used to embrace the whole goth and emo thing because they wanted to cross it into punk and make it something more unique and biting, creating its own aesthetic that would be transgressive and irritating to the mainstream. But given that by the late 2000s that very image had been commodified and warped into a marketing tool for mass consumption, something that the band had taken quite a bit of disgust and offense to, well, it would just kind of make it not fun for them anymore, and they would choose to go in the opposite direction. And while this sort of thing would typically be a bit of fun trivia to bring up regarding a funny moment in the band's history, or, more so just for a singular song, it was this anti-commercialism stance and their desire to go against the grain that would end up defining and becoming one of the biggest themes of Danger Days itself. As the second attempt at MCR4 was being recorded, Gerard would begin to introduce a concept. But unlike the previous records, this one didn't have so much of a story as it did a theme. And that theme would be The Killjoys. The Killjoys concept was a loose adaptation of a comic book idea that Gerard had been working on, and turned it into a rock opera. The costumes and character designs were created with real-life costumes and movie props that they had found at their local store, and the theme was a bit of a slice-of-life story about the titular Killjoys, a ragtag group of rebels who rode around a post-apocalyptic world fighting against a corrupt and evil corporation known as Better Living Industries in the dystopian setting of Battery City. On paper, this whole thing doesn't sound too far off, maybe a little more goofy and less dark than the previous material, but it's the aesthetic that they went with that really separates it from everything else that Mike Hem would ever do. It was bright, poppy, colorful, and had this really goofy and whimsical 70s aesthetic to it. I mean, I made a joke earlier that the main characters kind of look like Power Rangers, but that is kind of what they're going with. There's this Power Rangers Mad Max crossover thing going on, and the villains look like they're straight out of something like Flash Gordon, with their goofy masks and their laser pistols. Again, it's very purposely tongue-in-cheek, very purposely retro, and playing into this sort of, I guess, ironic blockbuster sort of aesthetic. And as I've already said probably countless times, it was such a departure and fit beautifully with the new direction of the music. Regardless of how you feel about the way Danger Days sounds, the way Danger Days looks is just fucking awesome. At least if you're a dork like me and actually read comic books and watch old sci-fi bullshit. But alas, with this new concept and direction in full swing, the band would begin to write and record Danger Days. But as the band began to produce this new version of their fifth record, a bit of a problem would begin to emerge. This would be the loss of Bob Breyer. Bob had long been the drummer of the band, coming in during the Three Cheers era and being the most consistent drummer for the group in an otherwise stable lineup. He would bring a certain stability to the project himself, though him being an outsider of the group always kind of played into their relationship, and there was always a certain level of separation and tumultuousness to this. And all of it would come to a head when Bob's beloved dog would tragically pass away, and it would be a massive turning point for him. In an NME article posted after his death in 2024, Frank would talk about his sadness over Bob's passing, and speak about his time with him, giving a heartfelt overview of their close-knit relationship and who Bob Worley was behind the scenes. But as it goes on, he speaks a bit more about Bob's paranoia and how over time he was just becoming a bit more of an unstable and volatile person, not just towards the other members of the band, but even to Frank himself. And once Bob's dog had tragically passed away, it was a bit of a point of no return, where the instability would take full hold of him. Now, a more serious issue would obviously result from this, and that would be the straw that really broke the camel's back for this relationship. And that would be the ongoing tensions and hostility between Bob Breyer and Mikey Way. Now, Mikey had his own grocery list of problems going on, and this is actually where the hilarious lore behind the whole family breakfast meme comes from. Though for the sake of time, I'll let you do the digging on that, which is, it's grime, but it's fucking hilarious. Though for the sake of time, let's just chalk it up to Mikey Way was dealing with addiction issues, personal problems, and a little bit of rock star infidelity towards his newlywed wife. And Bob would use these issues as a bit of a cudgel, attacking and feuding with Mikey. And obviously, this would cause some deep-seated tensions for the band, as it would exacerbate the already growing divide in their creative vision, as well as if you're gonna butt heads with Mikey, then his big brother Gerard is probably gonna start feuding with you as well. And this is without even taking into account the previously mentioned tensions and the bit of hatred that Frank felt coming from Bob towards the end anyway. So, as the recording of Danger Days was happening, Bob would be fired from the band, and the two would go their separate ways.
I mean, I know just on the look, I probably spent, I had 4 years on it. And it was started as a comic me and Sean Simon were working on with Becky Cloonan. We'd have these characters in our head. We went to a costume shop in East Rutherford. We made a rule for ourselves saying, if it's not in this shop, we can't build it, we can't draw it. So we bought all this very real stuff and then made it fantastic. And I carried a lot. Now, the characters in the comic obviously look a lot different from we look, but I carried some of that over, you know. And Blade Runner has been a big inspiration. A lot of late 70s and early 80s science fiction films, even science fiction book covers. I think my jacket's basically based off some obscure old science fiction book.
All right. I think it's time we finally just talk about this record. What did My Chemical Romance have in store for us after 4 years, a shelved record, 4 marriages, and a lineup change? Well, in short, it was Danger Days, The True Lives of the Fabulous Killjoys. And in the long, a complete reconstruction of what My Chemical Romance was from the ground up. As we've spoken about at far too much length at this point, the band had grown sick of its previous skin, and went to great lengths to fully shed it. And in the case of Danger Days, this wasn't just some aesthetic shift either. The music took an even more noticeable transformation as well. The greater majority of this album is written in major scales rather than the band's favored E minor, having an overall cheerier sound to it, and even on the album's more sad songs, it carries this same sense of whimsy and cheeriness. There are only really 3 types of tracks on Danger Days, and that would be those that are in the garage rock style, some synthy power pop anthems, and some good old upbeat arena rock. The record mixes these different styles of songs together in an eclectic playlist, and has a few interludes here and there where we get to hear Steve Rye from Mindless Self-Indulgence give us some pirate radio updates, similar to what you would have heard from Three Dog in Fallout 3.
Bad news from the zones, tumbleweeds. It looks like Jetstar and the Cobra Kid had a clap with an exterminator that went all Costa Rica and got themselves...
These are mostly just here to set the tone and give some immersion to the record, as the actual story aspect isn't all that focused, unlike the previous material from the band. Here it's more so just a backdrop, a way of creating a theme to the music itself, and gives the album just a little bit more style and just a little bit more flavor. Now, if we actually dig into the music, the album begins with probably the most iconic song off the album, Nah Nah Nah. even people who hate this album tend to love this song. And that's because out of everything here, aside from maybe Destroya, Na 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 is the most familiar track for old school fans, taking the more happy and upbeat sound of Danger Days and stilling it with more of the high energy punk rock sound that was familiar to what the band did on their older material, just crossed with some of the more glam elements that was introduced on The Black Parade. It's honestly a fantastic opener, and it sets a really good tone for the record because it doesn't take long for those changes that we mentioned before to really begin to show their face. I mean, it's on full showcase come the second track, Bulletproof Heart.
Bulletproof heart. You got a hollow point smile. Me and your runaway scars got a photograph treating on the getaway mile. Let's blow a hole in this town.
For anyone's first time listening to the album, Bulletproof Heart is, funny enough, the make it or break it track. It's where you either get whiplash or you fully accept what is coming in the following songs. It still retains a bit of that old school MCR sound with the guitar tone and the high energy, but it is where we first get to hear the more synth-oriented nature of Danger Days' music, and a lot more of those pop and even arena rock elements begin to take center stage. Though its saving grace is actually its lyrics. Gerard, as sweet and saccharine as he can be on Danger Days, does keep his trademark sass and violent imagery into the mixture here. I got a bulletproof heart, you got a Apollo Point smile. Me and your runaway scars got a photograph dream on a getaway mile. Let's blow a hole in this town and do our talking with a laser beam. Gunning out of this place in a bullet's embrace, then we'll do it again. In all honesty, these lyrics sound like they could have come off a track about the Demolition Lovers, but the major scale riffs and G's major scale melodies, well, it takes a whole new energy and far more sugary feel to the entire thing. All with that small tinge of violence that allows it to feel like an old school My Chemical Romance track. And honestly, I think that's the big thing to really talk about with Danger Days. It's not that the transition and contrast isn't huge, and it isn't that the album can't be alienating, but when people talk about Danger Days or it's brought up in conversation, a lot of people tend to really just throw it to the side and act as if it sounds like an entirely different band. I do get how some people may feel that way if they marathon through the catalog and you get to Danger Days because it is a bit of a whiplash record in that regard, but to say it doesn't feel like an MCR record is just wrong. Look, I get why people don't like it. Even in my opinion, this is their weakest among their four. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like this album is MCR's actual best work or it's some super misunderstood masterpiece that people unjustly shit on. No, Danger Days is definitely the band's weakest link musically. And at least in my opinion, it's, like I said, my least favorite of the bunch. It has some pretty bad low points for those of you who love the older sound, like the song Planetary Go. Look, I fucking hate this song, and I know a lot of others do too. It's a mess. It's pop in a way that the band doesn't really hit well, and Gerard's vocals on this thing are just a bit, all over the place, to put it nicely. And it really captures the worst aspects of Danger Days. But to also say it's just a straight up bad song that just sucks, well, that's not really the case either. It's just not as good as the album's better offerings, and strays so far from the band's core sound that it can become alienating and off-putting. And it's not like the whole album is like this, however, because you also have tracks like Destroya that feel like a genuine evolution of the band's older sound, but with its new identity in tow. Even songs that people pretend are alienating and use as an excuse to say that Danger Days is a complete far cry from MCR, like Scarecrow or Kids From Yesterday, well, they honestly sound more so like they sprouted from the roots of a lot of the softer, more ballad-esque material that the band put out on the Black Parade. Sure, Scarecrow has a bit more emphasis on psychedelic 70s rock, and the Kids From Yesterday sounds a bit more arena rockish than anything else the band ever made. They aren't all that different from the Black Parade songs though. I mean, just listen to I Don't Love You or Disenchanted, which, as we talked about in the last video, were steeped in a bit of Green Day and Goo Goo Dolls influence. For the most part on Danger Days, there's really only a handful of tracks that hit that alienating level that Planetary Go does. Most of the album just sounds like a happier, poppier take on that classic My Chemical Romance sound. The only reason I think most people really want to call this album alienating and they hate it so much is honestly just because the record is kind of mid. It has high points like Na Na Na, Bulletproof Heart, Vampire Money, and The Kids From Yesterday that hit really hard. But it's a lot of the other tracks on the album that are just so-so, they're decent. If you like them, I'm sure you love them. But if you don't, they really aren't bad enough to just straight up hate and ridicule for sucking, because they don't. And while most albums that are in this category tend to be the more cult hits with fan bases, forgotten by the rest of the world due to being overshadowed by the rest of the band's work, Danger Days is a visually striking and awesome enough album with its Killjoys concept that it sticks in your head. That, and it was the last full-length the band put out before their eventual breakup. With most artists who do an experiment in the vein of Danger Days, but they have a much larger catalog, these albums tend to still have a little bit of a love it or hate it mentality, but for the most part they're just looked at as the experimental record that didn't hit for most and end up sitting in the band's catalog as their cult hit record. Just look at artists like The Cure or Linkin Park, Korn, or even Depeche Mode. The bigger the catalog and the more consistent you are with putting out good quality music, the more people tend to accept these sorts of albums. But with MCR, they only have 4 records, and when 3 of the 4 are in a similar vein, and the last one tends to be the most alienating and weird, well, it's going to end up with a stigma. It's hard to just forget, and given that this record was divisive, I think that's what causes it to become so controversial among the fan base and even outsiders. It's a strange situation where an otherwise decent album that would normally just be a deep cut in the band's body of work is forced to become a love it or hate it album due to the simple fact that it's the last one. Like I said, if you like Danger Days, you probably fucking love it, and it's more than likely either your favorite or it's up there with your favorite. And if you don't like Danger Days, you probably just pretend it doesn't exist, or you take every opportunity to shit on it and blame it for killing the band. But, to be honest, as much as I didn't care for Danger Days when I was younger, I do say it gets better with age, because it stands out with songs like The Kids From Yesterday. Or masterpieces like Vampire Money. And they do make the album worth revisiting. But regardless of the perception it has today, at the time of its release, Danger Days would see critical acclaim upon release, and the backlash and negative attitude towards it wouldn't come instantly. Danger Days would be yet another smash success for the band, and the videos and singles and tours surrounding it would be huge, some of their most successful to date. While the overall direction of the band was anyone's guess for for the time being, it did seem like after 4 years' wait for Danger Days, MCR was still here to stay. Even with a 15-track album just seeing release, they would keep the momentum going by gifting the fans with another 3-song EP, The Mad Gear and Missile Kid. While there isn't much to say about this thing other than it exists and was just some extra tracks done as a bit of a what would the Killjoys listen to in their car bit of fan service, what's here is some fun heavier tracks. And hey, maybe they were a bit of fan service for those looking for that older, heavier sound.
Stage here at the NME Awards, I've been joined by My Chemical Romance, who are not only the winners of Best International Band, but they also just won Best Video as well. Congratulations, how are you feeling?
Feel great. I feel on fire.
How does it feel to pick up 2 awards this evening?
Really good. We only have 1, but we need a lot more middle fingers, I feel. So.
Riding off the success of Danger Days with another smash hit, the record would contain many new singles for the band that would get tons of airplay on the radio, as well as music videos that reached tons of new viewers and continued the band's unending wave of success. But to say that it was a hit for everyone is, well, as we discussed in the album section, it's just kind of a lie. As I mentioned before, I did still enjoy Danger Days for what it was, but it is by far my least favorite project from the band. And this seemed to be the case for a lot of the fan base at the time, especially the old heads who had been with them since the beginning. For many, Danger Days felt like not just a new direction, but a complete rejection of the past, and I mean, that's essentially what it was. For many, if My Chemical Romance wasn't going to be putting out any more of their heavier, darker, and more post-hardcore material, well, then they were going to be disillusioned and let down by a long wait and eventual release of a record that more or less abandons and outright rejects the defining aspects of what made MCR. And this change came to, well, define something else for the band. On the flip side of the coin, there would be a massive surge of new and younger fans that were just discovering MCR during this time period, and they absolutely loved the new sound, the more pop and optimistic material, and embraced everything about it full sail. So inevitably this caused a big rift and divide within the MCR fan base, where you had essentially 3 camps of people. Those who loved the band before and after Danger Days and accepted both versions of them, those who felt let down or just straight up hated Danger Days and just wanted to talk about how much they love the old music or just straight up run away from the band entirely, and lastly you had the new fans who really only knew and loved Danger Days, and only after began listening to and enjoying the older material. And this schism would only intensify as the early 2010s came forward, with MCR being one of the premier bands that the at the time new Tumblr crowd had adopted, and more young fans would come to fill the void and in many ways alienate and push out the older fans that the band had. The culture shock was very real and very apparent, and you can see that to this day with some segments of the fan base being the exact kind of person you think of when you hear the age-old phrase, check your privilege. In many ways, Danger Days caused a similar situation to what could be seen with the band Bring Me the Horizon. Once they started to shift their sound and image post the There Is a Hell era of their career, where a very relevant and palpable change was going on, not only with the band itself, but with those who flocked around them and became their biggest supporters. Though the big difference here was it was a lot slower of a process, since the band had put out Sempiternal, which acted as a bit of a bridge between the 2 eras that Bring Me the Horizon has really existed as, the deathcore and metalcore years, and the more pop-influenced, avant-garde rock metal thing that they are now. But with My Chem, it was a little bit more abrupt, to say the least. They kind of just jumped straight into a new direction and identity, causing the rift that would form due to that to be much more abrupt and abrasive. Now, I know this is probably sounding like a bit of a tangent, but just bear with me because I do think it's important to bring up. because the audience oftentimes reflects the band itself. If there was anything that Danger Days did, it was turn the tide, setting the band onto an entirely new path moving forward. And the reason that it really relates here is because MCR was becoming more and more of a younger person's band. And with their hilarious and honestly really fun appearance on Yo Gabba Gabba of all things, singing a song about being a special little snowflake, it really only made sense. And for the band themselves too, as well, they were quickly becoming family men who had children and more than likely wanted to shift things into a place where they could hold events and make music that their kids could also enjoy. This is also probably why the band's touring cycle was much shorter this time around, only really touring for a year and a half off the album, rather than the nearly 4 straight years they spent during the support for Black Parade. Because again, the band had families, they had kids to take care of, they were beginning to get to that age where the non-stop touring really starts to take a toll on your body and mind, and in general didn't need to do things on such a massive scale to stay relevant and make money. In many ways, Danger Days was a conclusion of an era, cementing the band as a mainstay in pop culture, such as the likes of Nirvana, Marilyn Manson, Linkin Park, and others on that level, but also cementing them as the voice of a generation of the past and a voice of the generation of the future, once being the kings of emo and mall goth, making iconic music and anthems for them, but now embracing on a new path and touching a new era of youth, voicing things about the current issues that were happening during that time period, and really embodying a lot of what the newer, younger teens were wanting to hear talked about, wanting to see, and, well, their fan base reflected. But as with any sort of double-edged sword like that, it does come at a cost, and that cost was a good chunk of the older fans, as well as, well, when you reach the peak of fame and success, that also means that you've reached the precipice of it.
Days. Is this the happy album of My Chemical Romance everybody was expecting?
Well, I guess they were expecting a really angry album, but we made a really we made kind of a
Positive album.
Yeah, positive album. That's Rob very early. Rob Corrales started referring to it as an assault party, and that's the way I like to think of it, as an assault party too. But it's definitely positive. Well, it's not dealing with dark subjects anymore. It's not dealing with life and death. But it's dealing with right now, and it's dealing with the future and things like that. And those things are, positive to me.
At the end of the touring cycle for Danger Days in 2011, an abrupt and honestly absurd event would end up taking place, leading to the end of the business and personal relationship that the band had with their touring drummer, Mike Petticone. Mike would be the fill-in / touring drummer who'd come in to take up the empty space that Bob left when he exited the project. And for the most part, he ended up getting along well with the band and was even being considered for a full-time position, according to Frank. Well, that was the case before a sticky situation got uncovered. The bald man got caught stealing from the band. During the act itself, and when confronted, he didn't even deny it. Some shit happened, and before the blogosphere gets all crazy with false statements and ridiculous opinions, we want the true story to come from us. But please listen close, because this is the only time we're going to talk about this. The relationship between My Chemical Romance and Michael Petticone is over, and he was caught red-handed stealing from the band and confessed to the police after our show in Auburn, Washington. We are heartbroken and sick to our stomachs over this entire situation. The band has no intention on pressing charges or taking this matter any further than we have to. We just want him out of our lives. The people who play in this band are family, and family should not take advantage of each other like he did. We're currently moving forward and hope to have a new drummer in place for our show in Salt Lake City, Utah. The show must go on.
We had bad experiences at festivals, at Reading, at Download, and things of that nature. Like, there was a very combative feeling. And then also, too, if you really know all the ins and outs of the band, like at that point, too, like we were pretty sure that the drummer that's on that show, that recording, that was stealing from us and kind of us over, and that was really crazy. Like, there was a real weird thing happening. But we knew that this was an important show. We weren't going to let him take that from us.
Now, this is already a pretty fucked up situation. You lose your longtime drummer due to a mixture of grief-filled mental instability and feuding with your star bass player. In a pinch, your friend comes along and becomes part of your band, and for the better part of 2 years, you spend countless days together playing shows, bonding, and raking in success and money like nobody's business, only for them to turn around and steal from you. Yeah, that's not a good spot to be in, but the worst part is actually when that same drummer, who admitted to being a dirty little thief, turns around to tell the press that he didn't do nothing, and all he was trying to do was blame someone else to solve some apparent beef they had. Almost as soon as I began touring with MCR, I ran into problems with a member of the band's crew who I'll not name. The problems were many, big and small, but some of them were large enough that they began to greatly impact me and, by extension, my family. I'd reached my wit's end and I made what was clearly the poorest decision of my life. Rather than just address the issues that I had with the crew member in an open and honest manner, I tried to make them look irresponsible. My intention was to make this person look incompetent. So, if we take this at face value, then good old Schmike wasn't actually just trying to be a scummy thief to maximize his illegitimate profits. He was actually being an even more slimy and disgusting person trying to frame an innocent man that he apparently thought hated him and cause him to just lose his employment and fuck over his family and possibly face legal issues and criminal charges of theft. What? It's just fucking laughable how stupid this guy is, and honestly, he would have looked way more forgivable if he just was a petty, greedy thief. But hey, who knows? Maybe he really is just that fucking dumb. But regardless, this would end up causing some big tensions within the band, and after this tour, they would end up taking a bit of a break. Now, come 2012, My Chemical Romance had more or less gone quiet, enjoying their private lives and pursuing other things while they prepared for the next leg of their journey. Frank Iero would talk about the band and how they were beginning to work behind the scenes on some new material, and that fans could expect something new by the summer. But in reality, behind the scenes, the quartet would hit walls. This would end up being one of the final straws for the band before they decided it was best to just part ways and try different things. And that would be the final attempt at a fifth record, one that we would later come to know as Paper Kingdom. Now, there isn't really much to talk about or say when it comes to this mythical fifth record other than it happened. Some leaks have popped up over the years, and this would be where the band's final song to release before calling it quits ended up coming from, but Paper Kingdom was never finished. It only got so far into development. It was originally supposed to be a bit of a return to form for MCR, heading back to the familiar territory of the dark and tragic, and we know this because Gerard has spoken a little bit about it in a few interviews. I fell back into old habits because it's easy because I felt in control. I wasn't in control at all. And then after that, climbing out of it got worse. It got worse because I became even more paralyzed and more depressed. And I started to work on a record that was a concept record about a group of parents in a support group because they all lost their children in a horrible way. And that was supposed to be the last record. And that's not the story I wanted to tell, and the songs reflected that. You could hear it. And all the joy was gone. And in another... So that My Chem record that didn't get made, it was really... Not only was it really dark, I was basically finding anything else to do besides the music. It's like, I cared what the songs were, but it's like it's gonna be a bunch of dark stuff and we're going to build costumes and stage sets, and it's gonna be this storyline about a support group of parents who are dealing with the loss of their children. So they make up the story about the children all being missing in the woods and fighting this witch. That was what it was about. It was called Paper Kingdom, and there may be a time in life where I do want to do Paper Kingdom, and maybe it's a book or maybe it's something else. It really just seemed that after years of success, but the last 4 or 5 being filled with constant issues, either relating to mental health, tour burnout, juggling the life of a touring musician while being a father, that it really just all became too suffocating. And with that, everything would just kind of come to a halt. Towards the end of 2012, though, the band would put out another offering, and this time it would be that record we talked about at the beginning, Conventional Weapons. This would be the shelved album of material, and it would be released in 2-song singles. And once everything had been put out, they would finish it off by putting it all together into one compilation and releasing it as its own little record. But again, after this, it was back to crickets. Until early 2013. Because that's when an announcement would be made regarding the future of My Chemical Romance on their official website. And it would say the following. Being in this band for the past 12 years has been a true blessing. We've gotten to go places we never knew we would. We've been able to see and experience things we never imagined possible. We've shared the stage with people we admire, people we look up to, and best of all, our friends. And now, like all great things, it has come for it to end. Thank you for all your support and for being part of the adventure. This announcement would be a massive blow to the fans. And the end of My Chemical Romance was seen as not just a band breaking up, but a real end to an era. They had been one of the longest standing artists from the emo wave since many of the other big names of that time period had either broken up, gone on hiatus, or just dissolved into some weird amalgamation. And outside of maybe Fall Out Boy, no name was as big as MCR, at least one that had called it quits. Gerard would end up expanding on his reasons for ending things in a long essay, one long enough that I'm not going to read the entire thing here, but I will share some important bits from it. There are many reasons My Chemical Romance ended. The trigger man is unimportant, as was always the messengers, but the message, again as always, is the important thing. But to reiterate, this is my account, my reasons, and my feelings. And I can assure you there was no divorce, argument, failure, accident, villain, or knife in the back that caused this. Again, this was no one's fault, and had been quietly in the works, whether we knew it or not, long before any sensationalism, scandal, or rumor. There wasn't even a blaze of glory in a hail of bullets. I'm backstage in Osbury Park, New Jersey. It's Saturday, May 19th, 2012, and I'm pacing behind a massive black curtain that leads to the stage. I feel the breeze from the ocean find its way around me, and I look down at my arms, which are covered in fresh gauze due to a losing battle with a heat rash, which had been a mysterious problem in recent months. I'm normally not nervous before a show, but I'm certainly filled with angry butterflies most of the time. This is a different, strange anxiety jetting through me that I can only imagine is the sixth sense one feels before their last moments alive. My pupils have zeroed out, and I've ceased blinking. My body temperature is icy. We get the cue to hit the stage. The show is good, not great, not bad, just good. The first thing I notice, take me by surprise, is not the enormous amount of people in front of us, but to my left, the shore and the vastness of the ocean. Much more blue than I remembered as a boy. The sky is just as vibrant. I perform, semi-automatically, and something is wrong. I'm acting. I never act on stage. Even when it appears that I am, even when I'm hamming it up or delivering a soliloquy, suddenly I become highly self-aware, almost as if I'm waking from a dream. I began to move faster, more frantic, reckless, trying to shake it off. But all it began to create was silence. The amps, the cheers, they all began to fade. And all that was left was the voice inside, and I could hear it clearly. It didn't have to yell. It whispered, and said to me briefly, plainly, and kindly what it had to say. What it said is between me and the voice. I ignored it, and the following months were full of suffering for me. I hollowed out, stopped listening to music, never picked up a pencil, started slipping into old habits. All of the vibrancy I used to see became desaturated and lost. I used to see art or magic in everything, especially the mundane. The ability was buried under wreckage. Slowly, once I had done enough damage to myself, I began to climb out of the hole. Clean. When I made it out, the only thing left inside was the voice, and for the second time in my life, I no longer ignored it, because it was my own. There are many roles all of us play in this ending. We can be well-wishers, ill-wishers, sympathizers, vilifiers, comedians, rain clouds, victims. The last one, again, is important. I never thought myself a victim, nor my comrades, nor the fans, especially not the fans. For us to adopt that role right now would legitimize everything the tabloids have tried to name us. More importantly, it completely misses the point of the band. And then, what have we learned? With honor, integrity, closure, and on no one's terms but our own, the door closes, and another opens. The entire letter is worth reading and goes far deeper than just the portions I've read to you here. But to cut to brass tacks, the passion was beginning to fade, the identity was suffocating, and overall, Gerard had reached a point where he felt it was time to let go and begin anew. And this feeling was more or less shared by the other members of the band. Gerard would even say later on that he didn't even see the band going past Black Parade.
To be honest, I never saw My Chemical Romance going past Black Parade. I planned things pretty far in advance, and before we'd even done the first record, I would write out titles of things. I definitely knew I had the title of the second album before we'd even recorded the first. And by the time I'd got to the third album, which didn't have a name, I felt like that was the end. And basically, the time spent after Black Parade was me fighting against that instinct and fighting against myself. So the end of Black Parade felt like a very natural ending. To go beyond that felt like betraying some sort of artistic command that I had within myself. And I'm still proud of the shows we played especially and the music we made after Black Parade, but I definitely didn't have anything planned after the third.
And given this identity crisis, the long wait, the struggle to simply get a fourth record off the ground, an impossibility to create a fifth, it's honestly pretty believable. And with that, My Chemical Romance would cease to exist, putting out one last offering, a greatest hits compilation album with a farewell track called Fake Your Death. Now, given that hindsight is 2020, this was a clear sign that at some point, the boys were going to get back together. But for the time, well, any speculation of that sort was just conspiracy. But until 2019, when the announcements of a tour would happen, from early 2013 and onward, MCR was over. They'd reached their endpoint, and with it, an end of an era. The end of the original run of the leaders of the 2000s Molgoth wave. Though it's not like they went quietly, as each member would spend the following years pursuing new musical endeavors, with Frank putting out a fuck ton of solo material and engaging in some other projects, and Ray doing his own thing kind of in the quiet background but still releasing music. Mikey would attempt his hand at some new wave with his project Electric Century, and Gerard would put out an underrated gem of a record titled Hesitant Alien, and would further pursue his comic book career, even getting an imprint at DC titled Young Animal. But that's all different stories that can be covered in videos of their own. As for the original run and story of My Chemical Romance, well, this is the end. A band steeped in legacy and acclaim. One who left a mark in music so big that it's still heard today. And when they did eventually come back, it was like nothing else. Almost no band has had a return as massive and beloved as theirs. and it's fitting. They wrote albums that have stood the test of time. And love them or hate them, they're one of the best bands to ever play the game. So, despite a rocky fourth album, here's to you, My Chemical Romance. But with all that being said, I have just one last thing to show you. This is my wall of shame. The names of all those who financially back me and bankroll my videos one bad financial decision at a time. And hey, if you enjoyed the video or even a long-standing freeloader of the channel, well, the link to my Patreon and Ko-fi are in the description. I'm truly grateful for those who support me, and it means the world, so thank you. And for all of those of you who came for the MCR videos, don't fret, I still have plenty of more stuff to talk about when it comes to this band, especially a lot of those side projects, because most of them are pretty fucking good, especially Frank's career. He's had a lot of really good stuff, so stick around, I've got plenty more content for you, but with all that being said, subscribe, follow me on Twitter, and I'll see you in the next video.